All right. Well, good afternoon, and welcome back to our incredible conference here, Schools of Thought. It's my pleasure to introduce now our afternoon panel, led by the Equity in Architectural Education Consortium. Please help me welcome Joana dos Santos, the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the University of Michigan. Joanna will introduce her co-presenters.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having us. Thank you for your hospitality, for really having this important conversation about equity in this space. So my name is Joana dos Santos. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm here with some of the members of the Equity in Architecture Consortium, Marianne Akers, who's the Dean of the School of Architecture and Urban Planning at Morgan State University, Stephanie Pillad, the Director of the Division of Architecture here at Oklahoma, and Carmina Sánchez-del-Valle, Professor of Architecture at Hampton University. So we're talking about this consortium, right? What is this thing that we are talking about? And I'm probably going to forget to do the clicking thing, so. So we started the Equity in Architectural Education Consortium with a meeting around 2 years ago, when we had faculty allies grant at the University of Michigan, and very well-intended faculty said, like, hey, we have connections at minority-serving institutions, particularly historically black colleges and universities. Let's talk to them to see how we can diversify the PhD program. Very well-intended, but very rapidly, members of Totman College and also some of the people who we reached out who are here today said, no, we are not going to do that, because you cannot just go to places where you have people of color and tell them to give you their students. So we decided to have a different conversation. And we pushed back and we crafted an agenda together that ended up leading us to talk about what does equity in architecture look like? How do we think about this? This is a very white, male-dominated field. So how do we rethink this? So we ended up forming the consortium after a year of work together, where we decided that we're going to leverage our resources, because all of us have different resources that are very valuable, to reduce inequities and disparities for students of color and underrepresented minorities in graduate and professional architectural programs, and also impact the fields and the disciplines where our students will take careers. And the idea was that this disparities that we see and this inequity that we see in school doesn't really end after people graduate, right? So we need to be having a conversation as a field, and where we have the most influence is in the school where we teach, right? So here's a list of our members: Florida A&M University, Florida International University, Hampton University, Howard University, Morgan State University, Tuskegee, and I'm reading to make sure that I don't leave anyone out, the University of Michigan and the University of Oklahoma. So right now we're working on initiatives that, and I need to make sure that it's very, very close. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, great. So right now, what we're focusing on is faculty building relationships, because at the end of the day, it's about sharing resources. But if we don't have relationships, we cannot share resources, right? The ultimate goal is for us to do research together on things that are impactful, where we have different lenses and strengths. But if people don't know each other, they're never going to collaborate, right? So we're starting with projects that are manageable, that are one-on-one. So we're working around things of urban design. For example, Carmina is working with one of our faculty members on that. We're working on pathways programs. We're also looking into working on historic conservation, particularly some of our HBCU campuses are historic sites. So how do we take advantage of that? And something like very basic, like, can we just do faculty exchanges for reviews, right? Like, how do we start those conversations? So, and we have a lot of other ideas, but that's kind of where we're at. So with that, it's a little bit of our history and how we got together, and we wanted to share a little bit of the work that we're doing and some of our thinking with you all. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Carmina, who's going to lead us in the next part.
Good afternoon. This is going to be a highly interactive session, and we have broken it into chapters, and each chapter will have like a main question. My job is to propose, and I just realized that I didn't grab the clicker, but I will need you to click because I cannot. I want to stand. I'm sorry, I'm short. So we're going to be starting with the inference change, the thinking that led to the proposal that we have today, and the prompt that you should be seeing on the screen is if students are not blank slates and possess relevant, if unrecognized knowledge, skills, and experiences, how acknowledging them can contribute to shape the space for teaching and learning design and the built environment. How do we do it now? How well are we doing it? What must be different? And the premises are the work of architecture can benefit all members of society. The work of architecture has a positive impact on a small group of people. A wider impact requires, among other things, designers, architects that are acquainted with the needs and demands of a larger spectrum of society and can act to satisfy them. The education of designers, architects, shapes practice. Therefore, who studies architecture will make a difference in the reach of the work. Then, recruiting more diverse students will open the way for a more meaningful architecture. Caveat, this is the but I need to look at it. You're seeing it, can you change? Oh, okay, you don't have it. I have it here. Some of those students, this is the hook. Some of those students don't find a space in architecture, and the settings, content, approach, and goals of education may be indifferent to what they see as the larger societal needs and aspirations for architecture. And some in academia consider this requires accepting less proficient and academically prepared students, which will weaken the profession. Now we're moving into the first chapter of the interaction, and this one is going to be perspectives on what diversity, equity, and inclusion really look like in architectural education. Marianne Akers will lead that.
Thank you, Carmina. Can you hear? Okay. My voice is coming from serving as Dean of Morgan State University School of Architecture and Planning for 13 years. I identify as a Filipina immigrant with more than 40 years of academic experience. I do not claim nor have the honor to be the voice of the Black community. I know my place. So the first statement, provocative statement I want to make, that's least of the two, is the field of architecture education has not truly embraced the role that HBCUs play in diversifying the field and teaching traditionally white institutions how to diversify. We are looked at from the deficit gaze. We have, not yet. We have 7 schools of architecture in HBCUs scattered around. Next, please. I wrote this article for Design Intelligence in 2007 about design disparities and the role of HBCUs. Have I seen anything since then? That was 13 years ago. I have not seen the needle move. So the 7 HBCUs graduate approximately 45% of all African American students with professional architecture degrees. Each of us are different. We have public and private HBCUs. We are unique in our heritage, and we have different offerings. Morgan State is the only HBCU that has interior design, architecture, landscape architecture, city planning, construction management. But we are a tight group. We watch out for each other. We do not compete. There was a time that we had the great big funder who wanted Tuskegee, Howard, and Morgan to compete against each other to design a e-library in Liberia. And we said, no, we're not going to compete. We're brothers and sisters. We don't do that. So what did we do? We had each team from every school, and then they competed against each other. We are often approached for partnerships. University of Michigan, SUNY, I won't say which one, but we often take the stand that we do not want a dole out. We want to be true partners. And we can sense when you need black and brown faces. We sense that. So, next please. We can teach you if you listen. Next please. We can teach you about diversity and inclusion. HBCUs are open to everyone and anyone. Our faculty, just in the School of Architecture and Planning, 1/3 black, 1/3 white, 1/3 other nationalities from all over the world. Just in the School of Architecture and Planning, as of 10 years ago, our students represented 32 different countries. Diversity, we will teach you about diversity. Next, please. Here's just some slides that I took from the United Negro College Fund. HBCUs, we are the experts in nurturing our students, especially first-gen students. Research shows that African American HBCU students make intellectual gains that are equal to or often exceed those that go to non-HBCUs. Next, please. I'll just highlight the big differences. Here is a survey, a Gallup survey. And those from HBCUs said, my professors at my university cared about me as a person. We in HBCUs know how to teach you about nurturing your students. Next, please. Experiential learning. Look at that. The third one. 32% of students said they're extremely active in extracurricular activities compared to 23% in traditionally white universities. Next, please. Postgraduate outcomes. 39 said, I'm going to go to my university prepared me well for life outside of college. 55% of blacks in HBCUs said that, compared to 29% in non-HBCUs. We know how to nurture diverse students. Next, please. Case in point. Statistics show HBCUs, we are promoters of well-being, the entire person. Purpose, social, financial, community, physical. We know how to nurture diverse students. We need to teach you that, and you need to learn from us. Next, please. So, what did I suggest 13 years ago? I said we need to formalize equitable relationships with HBCUs. We are not going to partner if you just want us for our black and brown faces. We know that. We're not going to take second fiddle. Okay? Next, please. Oh, sorry, back. One last statement. And this has something to do with HBCUs, but it's also my statement. I started community engagement in the 1970s, and I'll be honest with you. Have I seen any difference? No. I truly believe that we in the university are design colonizers. If we were really that good, why is it that we still have communities of color that are still distressed? We are deceiving ourselves if we think that only design can move the needle. That's all I can say. Thank you.
All right. So I am not an architect. I don't really know anything about architecture. My background is in racial justice community organizing. But I interact with architecture all the time. And what I can observe from an outsider's perspective from the field is that we build buildings and we design them to materialize what we value, right? So we build boxes for poor people, but we build design for people who can afford it, right? So we are really putting value into money by not putting design into the housing for poor people. So we're not thinking about the well-being of the user necessarily. So we are, by designing the way that we do, we are really putting value, and like we're judging it very, very clearly, and we're not really having a conversation about that. In the U.S., we get architecture that is very European-centric. I cannot see another Roman column. We have not had the Roman Empire for 2,000 years. Why do we still keep on putting those columns up, right? So that again tells us about what we value, right? And thinking about what about the people who does know their culture? What does that say to people when they have to interact with that? And particularly to non-white people who don't have heritage for that. I always think about, so I'm Uruguayan, I'm from Latin America, and I always think about these ecological houses. And when I'm growing up and I'm thinking about how we build these houses, I'm getting told that this is what poor people do because they don't have any money. And now that white people think it's all cool and can save the planet, now they're super valued. So imagine one message. I'm like, oh, well, now I have to like it again, and now I can take pride on it. But I don't have a platform to talk about, this has been an ancestral, traditional way of building houses that has worked for centuries but has never been valued because it didn't have that European lens or because Europeans didn't think about it. So what messages are we sending when we're telling people, well, now that white people think is valuable, now let's study it? It doesn't feel good. So architecture, as I mentioned before, is designed by white men for white men to thrive, right? That is what it is. And we know that restricting access to anything only causes further marginalization and oppression, and not even think about the loss of creativity and problem solving and advancement that we can make as a society if we would allow other voices, other experiences, other traditions to participate in this field. So what does change look like for me? And for me, I always think about my sister-in-law, who is a Latinx immigrant as well, and she went to technical school, and she studied drafting. See, I don't really know what I'm talking about. And she really wanted to go to architecture school, but her and my brother got married at 19. They were very young, and they moved out of the state. They went to a different state, and she wanted to study architecture. But in order for her to study architecture, she needed to leave my brother and go and immerse herself into school. But she couldn't do that because now she had a family, and she had to work full time to maintain her family. And she ended up going into construction management because construction management made a space for her. And now she's being very successful in a construction management firm. And to me, it's what success looks like is for her to be able to go to school, to be able to become an architect, and really working through her dreams and not having to go to something that ended up working for her. But it wasn't the thing that she wanted because the door was shut for her. So with that, I'll give it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Joanna, for that introduction. So I became the director of the School of Architecture here at OU in 2016. And since that time, working with my colleagues, and especially the Faculty Development Committee over here, we've been trying to figure out how to create a more inclusive environment for our students. But we realized pretty early on that we did not have the answers in terms of how to do that. So there's a tendency among architecture faculty to look back on their own time in school and their own education and think that, hey, that worked for me because I'm here and I'm, successful. So that must be the best way to teach our students. And the problem with that thinking is that it ignores all the absences in the room, the people for whom that method didn't work. We can't know even today, who's missing from this room, who was marginalized or excluded or made to feel unwelcome. We can't know the histories and lives and perspectives and possibilities that were excluded from this room, from architectural education, from the profession as a whole, because of some of the practices in architecture school. And so here at OU, that kind of realization led us to look towards research on learning and teaching and bias. And we invited some of our colleagues from the College of Education to come in and literally school us on how to adapt our teaching to the students who are in our classroom. And we've also been turning to a lot of great reading. So we read How Learning Works here on the right, which has some great information. It really synthesizes a lot of the latest research on learning and teaching, and in particular is helpful in thinking about motivation. We learned that being publicly berated doesn't motivate most people. Even though it might have worked for those of you in this room, it doesn't really work. We also have been reading Claude Steele's research on stereotype threat in the book Whistling Vivaldi, and I'll return to that a bit later. And we've been reading Peak, thanks to Elise Newman here in the front, who introduced us to that book. And I want to share just one important takeaway from that has changed our thinking about teaching. The book Peak is scientific studies of how we develop expertise in a given field. And it talks about things like how we learn to play piano, play tennis, become computer software programmers, architects, engineers. It's really looking at what are the common elements of the development of expertise across all of those various fields. And what it establishes is that it's not innate talent or natural ability for almost all things that we can learn, even perfect pitch. It can be taught. What matters is the quality of your practice and the amount of time you put into practice, but really the quality of practice. And it develops this whole theory of deliberate practice, which I won't go into. But the thing that is radical for us as architecture educators is because that shifts our role in the classroom. So no longer is it our job to identify which students have natural ability and talent and to push the others out. Our job is to recognize that every single student in our classroom has the potential to become a great designer. What will distinguish those who do and do not become great designers is the quality of their practice. So our job is to teach them how to use their time wisely and challenge themselves. And that has really shifted our thinking here at OU. So with that, I will turn it over to Carmina.
So I will go very, very fast in a whirlwind trip into one example of one of the programs, this one at Hampton University, where I teach. And I just want to tell you who I am. I study architecture in Puerto Rico, completed doctoral studies at the University of Michigan, where I learned what it was to be a Latina, Hispanic, Puerto Rican in a predominantly white university close to a black city, Detroit. Where are we? We are in Hampton Roads, the peninsula, it's called, where the meteorite formed Chesapeake Bay at the entrance of the James River and the Potomac River, and also where there's a very seminal project by Hilliard Robinson, Aberdeen Gardens, that was designed for, built by, owned by African Americans and continues to be a LEAF project that it's now a historic landmark. Hampton University is next to historical town of Hampton, a second, or actually oldest English-speaking settlement in the United States. And I'm sure you read the 1619 supplement in the New York Times and know that the first Africans arrived in Point Comfort right next to us. The university was established in 1868 after the U.S. Civil War by the American Missionary Association and the Freeman Bureau. Booker T. Washington, the founder of Tuskegee Institute, was a student at Hampton University, and the motto, it was training for the head, the hands, and the heart. Very important, the heart. It was a trade program from its inception. The first construction engineering courses were offered in 1922, and Albert Farwell Bemis, millionaire of that time, gifted the building that we now occupy, designed by Theo Ballou White, who was a student of Paul Craig. So we have Bemis Hall that was designed in a Art Deco Belgian style. That's what I have been told. And the first architecture course was offered in 1940. The founder of the program was William H. Moses, first African-American licensed architect in Virginia. He studied at Penn State, NYU, and Columbia, worked for Bernard Woodson Tandy, Madam Walker's architect, imagine that. And Hampton University certainly is a place of tradition, of respectful relationships, of legacy, and what are we? We are a private institution with open admission program, 5.5-year master, 7 full-time faculty, 2 adjuncts, and I am the only full professor. I mean, I want more to be like me. Who are our students? They are middle class, some students privileged backgrounds, mostly suburban, committed to their extended families and to their communities, and they inhabit several homeworlds. Why are our students at Hampton? Because they want to be architects, because of family legacy, HBCU experience, it's the only accredited program in Hampton Roads, it's small, and because of our focus, urban design, and service to underserved communities of color, and, very important, sea level rise. Everything floods. So, as a faculty, how do I make sure that space for learning is created? Well, I have to be open to adjust what I'm doing based on students' interests. Projects and work has to be relevant in terms that it serves current and future needs. It has to be application-based. There has to be a takeaway. Formal abstractions, precious objects usually are not exciting. I have to be respectful at all times, and they respond in the same way. Community building oriented and collaborative, because competition is really a turn off. And what I'm showing you is just images of review. We use a lot peer-to-peer, and they take it very, very seriously. Ending story. Yesterday, Niels Gore and Shannon Chris shared with us a very, very beautiful note from one of their young students. And the student said, "Will you miss us?" And that reminded me of my students who always ask me every semester when we have the final review, I teach thesis, "Are you excited about our work?" And I say, "Yes." "Are you anxious about us failing?" And I say, "No, why should I? I expect the best." Because the work that we do together matters. It has to matter to me too. Thank you.
MSU interaction. So we're going to get you started with that. So we just talked about some of the impacts of architectural education and the way that we have done it, how we're thinking of our framing, who has access, some of our ideas. And we want to start thinking about our own experiences. Because we think that if you don't know where you're coming, you don't know where you're going. And we don't take time to explore. Like, how did this work for me? Like, what was my experience? Because we're done, right? And you're like, I don't want to look back at that again. Like, that was, like Stephanie was saying, like, that was painful. Or maybe that worked. Who knows, right? But we want to, thank you. We want to start to have some conversations, and we want to do some interviews. And in the name of building community, if we ask you if you feel comfortable to talk to somebody who you don't know, because if we don't know each other, we're not going to change the world together. So that's an invitation. And we're going to ask you to interview each other. So each person, you're going to pair up, and each person is going to have 3 minutes to interview the other person. And I'm going to let you know when to switch. And we want you to kind of focus on the story. Don't focus on answering every single question. That's not the important part. The story is the really important part here. And as an interviewer, we want you to really be curious. We know that you can get excited and you want to share your story and you're like, yes, and this is my experience too. And we're not doing that. This is not the part to do that. Here, you want to listen to what the person's saying. And you might have to allow for science, and that's okay. We can get comfortable with science. It's not going to hurt you or kill you or anything like that. And we're asking you to take notes because we're going to do something with the information. If you want to find out more or probe so that the person can continue with their story, or you feel that there's more to it, invite the person to tell you more, or ask them what makes that experience important to them. How were they affected by it? What others were doing that helped them out, or how has this experience changed them? Are we good on the instructions? All right, I'm going to take your word for it. So here's the interview questions. So I want you to think about your time as an architecture student, or if you're not an architecture student, your time in school. And think about, when do you feel your ideas and experiences were valued? When were you at your best? And you're like, yes, people are listening to me. What did your professors do that made it exciting for you? What did the staff do that made you feel welcome? How did your classmates support you? When did you learn? What was the environment like when you learned the most? Are we good at the questions clear? All right. You are allowed to get up. So if you want to, you can do that. So if you can find a partner, and I'll let you know when to start, and then I'll let you know when to switch. Is that good? All right. Oh, thank you. Are you ready? Does everybody have a partner? Yeah? All right. 3 minutes. Do you identify who's going to go first, who's going to be the interviewer, and who's going to be the interviewee? Yeah? All right. 3 minutes, start, go. Right. So our first 3 minutes are up. You can thank your partner for sharing a little piece of their story, a little piece of their heart. Take a deep breath. All right. Now we're switching. So if you were interviewing, now you're telling a story. If you were telling a story, now you're interviewing. Ready? 3 minutes, go. Three minutes are up. So we're going to take another deep breath. Great. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get into small groups. And where is my, here's the clicker, of 5 to 6 people. The number is not important. You just want to have enough people to have a conversation. And we want you to share, and we're going to do this for like 3-4 minutes. So make sure that you share the time. Reminder for a lot of us who have privileged identities or who are in positions of power that we feel more comfortable talking, and particularly for extroverts. We are very comfortable, and some of us who might have more marginalized identities, who are carry the burden of oppression a lot more, or are introverts, might not feel as comfortable. So please keep that in mind in your participation. So we invite people to make space, and we if you take a little space, and if you don't take a little space, we invite you to take some. Yes, share. And this applies to the entire session. So we want you to share in your groups. What was the most energizing or inspiring story that you heard? And what surprised you about that story? You can stand. You don't have to talk to the people around you. You can, but you don't have to. And we're gonna have 5 minutes for that. All right. I'll tell you when to stop. So actually 4 minutes. Go. So I hope everybody had a chance to share. If you didn't get a chance to share, please continue talking after this session. Your conversation doesn't need to end right now, and we need more stories of things that have worked really well, because we focus a lot on the things that haven't worked, and we need to start rooting on things that have worked. So really quickly, in one sentence, we want 2 or 3 people to share some of the things that they were inspired by. Quickly. That were more similar than different? Awesome. Thank you.
I'll say this is Kendall Nicholson, ACSA. I'll say that there was a lot of congruence, but it seemed like intentionality and care for person, much like you all commented, seemed to be what made the difference for a lot of us. We didn't really talk much about who the person was. Like, we didn't talk about whether the person was black or brown, or it was really just about that there was one person that we were able to communicate to, and they were able to communicate back to us, and it made sense, or, we felt like they were really intentional and deliberate about it.
So intentionality and care was important. Great, thank you. One more?
Word for word.
So it seems to be a theme. Anybody has something different that they want to share?
Well, I think a couple of us talked about, or at least half of us talked about, we didn't have a direct path. And we were an architecture program, but we weren't just that new architecture design type person, but we had other interests, and we were able to find faculty members who would nurture us to get through that process.
Okay,
not everybody's going to go design those big glossy magazine buildings or other interests. You have to find people who support that.
So people who support the multiplicity of paths that you can have in the profession. Well, thank you so much. Really, what we want to take away from this part is that we need to recognize that our backgrounds and our social identities, and you said that it didn't matter sometimes, and sometimes you think about who's talking to you. So, really be mindful of that. The ways that they play a role in success and how you achieve success. And there are many ways to motivate and inspire students. And it's important to understand how we thrive and find inspiration, because not all of us find it the same way, right? It's like that connection and that intentionality is the same, but the way that it's done might be different for different people. And we need to recognize that our students might be different, and they are different from when you went to school. Okay? So with that, I hand it over to Marianne.
We're going to do a little exercise again. I mean, physically exercise, but I will ask you to look at or to reflect on the students that you have this semester. I'm going to call out characteristics that are very common in first-gen students, diverse students. But I want you, if you're able to, stand up when I go over this list, or you can also raise your hand. So how many of you have students who are over the age of 50 this semester? Stand or raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. What about who of you can sit down now. How many? Yeah, this is going to be quads. Okay. How many of you have students who bring children to the classroom? Okay, good. Okay. What about a student that plays in the band? Okay. Wow. A student of color. Okay. Okay, thank you. A student that works full-time before and after class. Okay. Back there. Okay, thank you. A student who's a parent. Many. Right? No, but there are parents who don't have children. There are parents who don't have children. Okay. A student who is the first one to go to college in their family. Okay. There you go. A student who is an undocumented immigrant. Yeah. Okay. A student who's pregnant this semester. Wow, you've okay. Okay. A student with mental health issues. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Thank you. A student who financially supports their family. Yeah. Okay. A student who's homeless. Yep. Yep. Okay. A student with physical or learning disabilities. Yeah. A transgender student. Okay, thank you. A student who's food insecure. Yeah. Sometimes we don't know about it necessarily, but they are there. A student who is a caretaker to an adult. Great. Okay. Thank you very much. What about, is any of you, or are you experiencing personally, and again, this is your choice, if you're experiencing any of those above right now? Or all of them, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, you yourself. You yourself. You personally. Okay? You were before and after, right? Before and after. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So what's the takeaway from this? right? So our students are all different, and they're all experiencing different life issues, right? If you have the chance, read the book Bandwidth, and many of our students have very small bandwidths, right? And just as a dean, sometimes our faculty don't necessarily know what's happening in their students' lives. I get it. I get it. And there were times I had to take personally a student to the counseling center because of suicidal thoughts. So it happens. And as you said, we have to be emphatic. I mean, not emphatic. We need to empathize with our students. What other takeaways do you have from just standing up and knowing that there's really diversity in our students' lives? Yes.
I would say that a lot of our administrative structures are not yet nimble enough to deal with it. So one of the things that we're facing at the university is increased mental
Yes.
mental emotional difficulties, and that is not being addressed adequately and studied abroad. I'm just telling you, we're coming up with when students travel, a lot of those issues are exacerbated, and it's not that the administration, and I'm part of that, I'm not it's not a desire not to deal with it. It's that the traditional university structures have not yet adapted to deal with the kind of fluid on-the-ground situation that we're dealing with in the classrooms and in our research. And that's just sort of, you kind of become more aware. Wait a minute, they're dealing with this. So another one is drug use. Drug use is not what it used to be, right? You used to be able to smell like alcohol, marijuana. Actually now it's a lot of opioids and other kinds of drugs. But you don't recognize when you're taking them. It's impossible for you to adequately address it. And it comes into play with things like the use of our equipment. Our equipment's dangerous. If you're not fully functional, you're going to get hurt. Right? You can't operate a laser cutter when you're stoned.
That's right.
Opioids. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I've tried. It doesn't. No, I'm just
Yeah, you're right.
Not knowing that, like we've had to have faculty discussions about, okay, drug use is a different kind of drug out there, and how to recognize those behaviors particularly in students. So just administrative help with that, where university structures still seem kind of taught the food insecurity.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
If you're hungry, you can't work. And being able to address that. So administrative, that's what got us to me.
Yeah.
Like, oh, wow, we need to learn some skills.
Yeah, that's a good point. Samya? Oh, and then.
So this issue of full-time work is what resulted into the paradox of full-time. The and more clearly what you're saying, the previous structure is too, there's this paradox of experimentation with technology. There's issues of experimentation with funding, because with the way that technology changed architecture, how we have learned about how architecture itself can become learned amongst students, all of those things lead to this paradox. And what's really interesting even more as the new demographics of both in the 90s, the college and vocational would take college students to actually go to other cities and visit their campus where they get their studies instead of being working full-time, traveling between those other campuses.
Okay. Good. Would you like to?
So the interesting thing is you called out all these different experiences or issues that they might be dealing with.
Yes.
And I have 7 students that are definitely going through some type of
Yes.
pain right now.
Yes.
And I think that what the culture is we have to get them out of school. There probably are other reasons why they aren't advancing in their classes even in the way that we want like them to. And oftentimes it's just that they don't have anywhere else to go for their day-to-day business right now. And so I think that first I find I would get on a group to recognize the fact that they need to get help because it's how can we get the best out of them if we don't know what's blocking them from getting there. So and the interesting thing is I'm also an advisor to a student organization where they are much more forthcoming about what's going on in their lives. And so oftentimes I have insights into my students that the other professors don't have. But there's also a certain amount of, I don't want to betray their confidence about what's going on to those other professors. So I encourage them to say, listen, give me time, go to your professor, tell them what's happening, how this is getting in the way of your work. They don't always feel comfortable. That's right. So we should definitely talk more about how faculty could support students getting to know your students so that you can feel comfortable with when they have a problem or if they're dealing with a situation, so that you can understand, how to adjust, for what's happening. Because a lot of them, they don't want to talk. And I don't want to portray their confidence, about something that's totally private to the rest of my faculty.
Right. That's so true. And we as faculty members, I don't teach anymore. Yeah, knowing, those signs. They're absent three times consecutive. What do? Just mark them, give them a D? No, find out what's going on. And one last takeaway from this exercise, the quad exercise. Any other? Yes.
That when I started teaching, my background's in education, and so when I started teaching, someone gave me this great advice that I used all the time I was teaching, which is that education is about the 3 R's, right? Rigor, relevancy, and relationship. And I think oftentimes rigor is obvious, right? And then we try to make content relevant. But the relationship piece, if you don't have that, then you're not going to get the best out of your students. And so all of the things that you called out are dependent on having that relationship piece. It's going to be hard to ask for rigorous or demanding workload if the students don't trust you, if you don't have the relationship. So.
And just FYI, as a dean, when somebody reports something, you get faculty members depending on the.
All right, so now that we've talked about the students in our classroom, I want to help us think through what are some of the impediments to creating inclusive learning environments. So the culture of architecture schools in the U.S. has been largely created and shaped by elite white men. And I think the pictures Joan showed yesterday were such a stark reminder of that, right? There were very few people in those pictures who weren't elite white men. And consequently, aspects of architecture school culture have long served to advance the values and power of that one group. And that advancement comes at the expense and exclusion of people of color, women, working class, people with disabilities, basically anyone not part of that group. And within the culture of architecture, there continues to be practices that serve to exclude, marginalize, or kind of weed out. And sometimes we might not even realize that these practices are doing that. And so I'm hoping we can kind of surface collectively some of the things that we've noticed, because we're all here, so we're paying attention to this, about that. And I'm going to kind of skip through this. I will say it's a great book and helps us think about that. But really, what I want you to do in your groups now is take 5 minutes and share what are some of the things that you've noticed. What are the roadblocks to inclusivity in the classrooms that you're aware of? What are the things that we call traditions in architecture school that serve to marginalize people? And then I'm going to invite you to share that out. So you've got 5 minutes. All right. I hate to break up these conversations, but I'm going to ask you to now share some of the things that you heard, like about what are these impediments. Who wants to volunteer first and share? Or I'm going to call on people. Not yet. All right, back here, Karen.
About was just not students who were unable to buy supplies. So we immediately get in studios and we say, okay, here's this project, and we don't ever think about, but you can sometimes see on their face, that means I have to go buy this stuff and it's going to be expensive, and I just don't have the funds to do that. So that's a real roadblock for some of them.
That is a huge impediment.
I thought I'd build on that. We had the same conversation, and then so use recycled materials when you can. It's good for the environment too. Another one was software expenses, and that sometimes they just really can't afford to do that. So could we as a nation of schools come together and approach some of these software companies and say, can you provide a scholarship or free access to students? Could that be something we could do?
That's a great idea. And Kendall, I'm going to put that on our AACSA agenda, right? They should be granting free software to students in order to get them hooked on it, for no other reason. Yeah. All right, right here, Samya.
Studio time, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 hours a day, work prevention. Faculty expectation that students will be working during holidays.
Oh, yes.
Review culture rewards extroverts. The environment of the studio is an impediment. Many students say that they like to work at home because it's either too cold or just the environmental condition if it's too big and loud and all of that. And lastly, and the most importantly, precedents are not inclusive.
Oh, yes. We can all, I think, do a better job with that. And as one who teaches history, I hear you. Other ideas right here. Thank you, Jerry. You're getting your exercise training for that next race.
Okay, I was just saying to my group that we should be more cognizant of how we deploy our students out into the public for projects. I told them a story about I had a student, and it's happened multiple times since then, but it was the first time I was confronted with it. I had a student who was deployed to go out and measure a site and document that site for an urban project, and he had the cops called on him because a lady in the neighborhood thought that he was casing homes and trying to break into his own truck, which was a very nice truck. And he did not know how he was going to get the project done, how he was going to do the work that he needed to do. And, a lot of, the professors didn't know how to address that. I said, the way you address it is you go out and you maybe talk to the community, or we come up with some other ways or best practices to prepare our students for those kind of situations. That may not happen. That might not ever happen to a white student, but right. People take it for granted that not every student can move through the world like that.
That's so important, yeah. One last comment on an impediment right back here in the back. What are the impediments to creating an inclusive culture?
Yeah, something Kendall mentioned was pinup culture, and you had mentioned it too, but tearing people down is actually just tearing people down. It's not much more to it than that. It's in a way see it and just picture in my head, it's like a man berate, and I've seen this in many reviews too, it's a very gendered thing too. It's men primarily will do that. And unfortunately, it doesn't just take men to be doing it, but I think it's a patriarchal culture and the assumption that I had one particular professor in college who's well known for tearing down her female students worse than her male students because she thinks that they need that to make it in this world. But rather than trying to deconstruct the culture as a whole, we just put up with that.
Yeah, we definitely need to do something about that. And I'm going to turn it over to Carmina now, who's going to lead our last exercise in thinking about solutions. Yes, you can still stand because she's going to...
All right. the last section. And let me tell you that you are providing the closing remarks. So when you get together, remember what we said at the beginning, that students are not blank slates. Try to bring back those interviews that you did in the first session. And we want to ask you, how do we co-create inclusive classrooms? But in particular, we have these two questions for you. What have you tried in terms of valuing the knowledge and experiences of your students, and what has worked? So what are the experiences, knowledge, and skills students bring to the classroom? How do we value them? But really, what we want to know is, what have you tried and what has worked? And you have 5 minutes to talk about this, and there will be a sharing session where we will be using an invisible ball to select who's going to talk. All right. We're closing this session. You're leaving now? Okay, all right. So this is how this works. I have an invisible ball in my hand. I'm going to throw it to somebody who's going to give us some very brief remarks. And then that person is going to throw the invisible ball to another group. It cannot be the same group. All right? All right. I'm going. You with glasses looking at me? You? Okay, okay.
Hi, everyone. Well, I'm just an intern here, but I just want to say that it was really cool to be a part of this group and to see that there's so many professors here who know so much about their students and care about their students and recognize the struggles that we go through. And so, yeah, I just really appreciated the session and seeing that you guys take our lives and our struggles seriously. So thank you. Oh, you.
Right here. Someone in our group mentioned that it's usually more difficult to achieve a meaningful professor-student relationship in larger groups, like in lecture courses, for instance. And I'm not an educator, but I've recently been a student. I graduated from college in last May. And one of my most memorable experiences was a professor named Betsy Blackmar, who's quite a well-known historian. And she teaches this lecture course called The Making of the Modern American Landscape. And she presents hundreds of images over the course of this semester of like photos that she's taken since the 1970s out of plane windows, trains, cars, walking down the street. But something that she does at the beginning of this course, every time she teaches it, is she asks every student in the class, and this is, could be 100, 200 people, to email her 5 images of things that they've seen in the American built landscape. So that could be something that's next to your dorm building, something like it could be your family home that you grew up in, something that you saw on a trip. And over the course of the semester, she incorporates at least one contribution from every student into her lectures and thanks you by name during the lecture where your image is incorporated. So students would be in this lecture about, the impact of colonial architecture in the American South, and then would see their home presented on the screens, or a lecture about like shotgun houses, and then it's their grandma's house on the screen. And, they all get called out by name by this, very famous historian, and it's a really meaningful experience in such a large environment to have that sort of connection. Yeah. Gonna throw it over there.
Solutions. Well, I just got to my university, and I do have a couple students, and I've found that I have to be there for them, and they're not even my students. So I do have a student, and it's kind of a roundabout story, but I'll just say that they're working. So, and I think I realized that if they were my student and I knew they had issues, personal life that, could affect their dynamics and as a student, I could have a great conversation with them and get them on track or help them figure out how to get through these obstacles. But there are some people traditionally who don't value someone working. So unfortunately, I had to kind of tell her that don't tell anyone you're working. That's kind of the only answer. But in the meantime, that's my role to start trying to reach out as many people as I can. I think every quarter is it. How about right there? Went right by the lady.
Say what you said. So, sharing a student's perspective on this, one of the biggest things that I found that helped me in my studio courses is when a professor comes in and doesn't try and carry themselves as if they are in that position of power. We know as students that they're there to teach us because they have more education and more life experience, and we embrace that, and it helps us learn better when we can relate to a professor on a personal level as if they are giving us the same respect that they expect out of us. And building those personal relationships and not feeling like they are carrying themselves as such a higher power position is how we can relate better and feel like we can build that trust to share personal issues.
So closing again, thank you, the University of Oklahoma, for giving us the space to have this conversation with you. And certainly we're very grateful to you for participating in this effort. Yes? Yes? Yes. Yes. So, Kendall, do you want to talk about the cards? Just as a closing 30 seconds?
Carmina and I were on the ACSA Education Committee years ago. But we talked about this very thing about solutions, ways to eradicate barriers. And so ACSA has a set of cards that are called Cards for Equity, and I happen to have one of those set of, I think there's 70.
You can buy them for...
I don't even know, but
okay.
They're on the website, so if you're interested, there they are.
So thank you again.
I just one general comment. I would ask is there a class, so I'm putting it out there. We need to stop referring to it as whiteness issues. We need to think about it as whiteness thinking. And I'm putting this out there because that underscores that our skin color and someone identifies us. And I'm putting this out there because I'm American Indian, and you probably don't know that. You're treating me as though I'm a European Caucasian, which I'm not saying that my experience has not been that, but I'm saying that my genetics are more complicated than you might know, which is probably true for everybody in this room. And especially when it's only 0.2% of who I am. It's just that portion that's determined that I have lighter colored skin, and my community is white, because if we stand in a row around the room, I guarantee you the difference between this is far more complex. So it's really white man thinking. I mean, I'm not going to back away from the fact that history, I totally get it. Like this, I agree. But we're hurting each other when we're constantly underscoring that it's bad to have, that it's been a bad history, that our skin colors are different. Our difference is what makes us strong moving forward. Does this make sense, right? So it's like it's the thinking that's the problem, not the person. They may carry that, but I tell you, I've met people with much darker skin color than I have who are white men in terms of their thinking. You understand? Like, this is not an issue of your skin color and your culture. It's a mindset, exactly. So I'm just asking, right, that we rethink this just a little bit more. It's a little bit more complex.
Point taken. Tremendous complexity. But I have to tell you a story of 20 seconds. I traveled with a group of students when I was teaching at Florida A&M. We went through Eureka, Virginia. I was traveling with a senior faculty from FAMU, a black woman, Laverne Wolfs-Bowie. We arrive at midnight. AAA had made the reservations in the hotel. We walk in. I stay outside in the van. She goes in with the students, all black students. The man, a white man. I mean, it's a matter of what you look like. Because I cannot deny that when I go into a place, Elise, and I know your point, it's well taken. It's thinking. But the man in the behind the counter said, I'm not giving you these rooms. She got me in the van. I went in, and she's very, very powerful woman. I went in and I asked God, what's going on? And he said, I'm not going to give her the rooms, but I'll give you the rooms. So, point well taken. There's thinking, but we cannot change what we look like. And there's stereotypes. It's a problem of stereotypes, too. It's a super complex, and we need to continue because we need to go into a break, and there's a lot of other presentations. And thank you again. Yes, coffee.